This is not a story. This is a warning. Across America, there are places where the nightmares never end, and the truth was buried with the dead. Tonight, we open another door. Welcome to the American Nightmare. Not long ago on American Nightmare Radio, we brought you a report about a strange phenomenon being quietly discussed in a small town along the western edge of Alaska. Residents there described something they had begun calling the blacks. At the time, the reports were difficult to verify. The descriptions were vague. Witnesses struggled to explain what they had seen. But the accounts shared something in common. Late at night, inside bedrooms, people were waking to find patches of darkness where darkness should not exist. Not figures, not silhouettes, and not the kind of shadows that form naturally in a dark room. Witnesses described them as void-like shapes, blacker than the surrounding night, darkness that seemed to have depth, shapes that did not stay still, shapes that sometimes appeared to respond when someone noticed them. Tonight, we take a closer look at those encounters, because multiple residents in Nome, Alaska, have reported the same experience. Separate homes, separate nights, but the same disturbing presence appearing in the same place, inside the bedroom. This is American Nightmare, and tonight we bring you the blacks, the bedroom encounters. If you enjoy investigative horror stories like this one, consider subscribing to American Nightmare, where we examine strange cases, unexplained encounters, and the darker corners of real-world folklore. Our first account begins during the long winter darkness in Nome, a time of year when night stretches for most of the day. Snow covers the ground for miles in every direction, and moonlight reflecting off that snow becomes the only illumination entering many homes after midnight. The witness had gone to sleep normally that evening. Nothing unusual, no strange sounds, no disturbances. Sometime after midnight, they woke suddenly, not from a noise, not from a dream, just awake. The bedroom was dimly lit by faint moonlight coming through the window. In places like Nome, residents are used to sleeping in near total darkness. The shapes of furniture become familiar. The position of doors, windows, and corners become second nature, which is why something immediately felt wrong. In the upper corner of the room, near the ceiling where the two walls met, there appeared to be a patch of darkness. At first, the witness assumed it was simply a shadow, but after several seconds of looking at it, something became clear. The darkness in that corner was deeper than the rest of the room. The surrounding walls were visible in the faint moonlight, but this patch of darkness seemed to absorb that light completely. It did not behave like a shadow cast by an object. There was no shape creating it, and no light source that would produce it. The witness continued watching. The longer they looked, the stranger the darkness appeared. The edges were not stable. They shifted slightly, as if the darkness itself was slowly moving, almost like a stain spreading across the wall. Then something happened that made the witness sit completely still in bed. The shape changed, not dramatically, but subtly. The patch of darkness seemed to contract inward slightly, then expand again. A slow, irregular pulse, like something breathing. The witness stared at the corner of the room, trying to understand what they were seeing. Seconds passed. The darkness shifted again, and this time the movement seemed to happen in response to being watched. The shape tilted slightly along the wall, not sliding, not falling, but adjusting its position, as if it had become aware of the person looking at it. The room was completely silent. Outside, the frozen town of Nome remained still beneath the Arctic night. Inside the bedroom, the witness did not move. They simply watched. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the darkness collapsed inward, not fading, not drifting away. It simply pulled into itself and vanished. The corner of the room returned to normal shadow. The witness remained awake, staring at the same spot for several minutes. Nothing else appeared. The room looked exactly as it should. But shortly afterward, a strange pressure began building behind the witness's eyes. Within minutes, a severe headache developed, a deep pressure that felt unlike any normal headache they had experienced before. The pain lasted for hours. No illness followed, no explanation was found, and the witness would later say something about the encounter continued to bother them. Not just the darkness itself, but the feeling that for several seconds, something in that corner had been watching them back. And in Nome, Alaska, that would not be the only report. The encounter we just described was not the only report to come from Nome. In fact, once people began quietly discussing what they had seen, a disturbing pattern started to emerge. Different homes, different witnesses, but the same kind of presence appearing in the same place. Inside bedrooms, late at night, always described as a patch of darkness that seemed too black to belong to the room around it. The second account occurred in a house located on the outskirts of Nome, not far from the edge of town where the last street lights disappear and the tundra begins. It happened during the winter, when darkness settles over the town for most of the day. On that night, the witness had gone to sleep normally. The house was quiet. Outside, snow covered the ground, and moonlight reflected across the frozen landscape. Sometime after midnight, the witness woke suddenly. Not slowly, not gradually, but with the immediate sensation that something in the room was wrong. For several seconds they remained lying still, listening. The house was silent. No footsteps, no movement, no sound from outside. But the feeling remained. The unmistakable sense that someone, or something, was present in the room. The witness slowly turned their head toward the foot of the bed. At first, nothing unusual stood out. Then their eyes adjusted to the darkness. Near the wall at the end of the bed, just above the floor, something appeared where there should have been empty space. A shape, but not a solid one. It looked like a tear in the darkness itself, a jagged patch of black that did not match the natural shadows in the room. Moonlight from the window faintly illuminated the wall behind it, but the shape seemed to erase that light completely, leaving a section of the room darker than anything else. The witness described the shape as being roughly the size of a large backpack. But unlike the first encounter, this one did not appear smooth or rounded. Its outline was uneven, angular, almost sharp in places. The edges did not remain still. They moved slowly, shifting inward and outward, as if the shape was struggling to hold itself together. Then the movement became more noticeable. The darkness began to pulse, not gently. The motion was stronger than the slow breathing described in the previous encounter. Each pulse caused the shape to swell outward slightly, before tightening again, like a heart beating inside the wall. The witness felt their body freeze. Every instinct told them not to move, not to speak, just watch. The shape continued pulsing. With each movement, the edges stretched outward for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. And then something else began to happen. The darkness appeared to lean forward slightly, away from the wall. Not enough to detach from the surface, but enough to create the impression that the shape was pushing outward into the room. The witness later said it felt less like a shadow and more like something trying to force its way through from somewhere else. Seconds passed. Then the shape suddenly tightened. The pulsing stopped. The jagged edges collapsed inward, compressing the darkness into a smaller and smaller patch. And then the void simply disappeared. The space where it had been returned to normal shadow. The witness remained frozen for several moments, staring at the foot of the bed. Nothing else moved. The room was quiet again, but only minutes later, a sharp pressure developed behind the witness's forehead. The headache came on quickly. Within seconds, it became intense. Then, something even stranger happened. Warm liquid began running from the witness's nose. When they reached up to wipe it away, their hand came back covered in blood. The nosebleed lasted several minutes, long enough to require towels from the bathroom before it finally stopped. But the physical effects did not end there. In the nights that followed, the witness began experiencing recurring dreams. In those dreams, they were back in the same bedroom, lying in the same bed, looking toward the foot of the room. And every time, the same shape appeared again, that same jagged void, pulsing slowly in the darkness, growing larger with each movement, getting closer, night after night. Even when they woke up, the feeling remained. The lingering sense that something had entered the room that night, something that had been aware of them. And perhaps more disturbing than the physical symptoms or the nightmares was one detail the witness could never explain. During the encounter, while staring at the shifting darkness near the wall, they felt absolutely certain of one thing. The shape at the foot of the bed was not just present. It was monitoring them, paying attention to them. And in another home in Nome, someone else would wake in the middle of the night to see the same impossible darkness. By the time the second report surfaced, people in Nome had already begun using a quiet name for what they believed they were encountering. They simply called them the Blacks. No one could say exactly where the name originated, but those who had seen the phenomenon seemed to understand it immediately. The shapes were not figures. They were not shadows cast by objects in the room. They were something else entirely. patches of darkness that seemed deeper than the surrounding night. And in several reports, witnesses described the same disturbing detail. The darkness did not behave like something passive. It behaved like something aware. The third encounter we examine tonight came from another resident of Nome, who experienced something far more disturbing than the previous accounts. This witness had gone to sleep normally that night. Outside, moonlight reflected across the snow-covered ground, casting a pale glow through the bedroom window. Sometime after midnight, the witness woke suddenly. But this time the disturbance was not visual. At first it was a sound, or at least something that felt like sound. A faint, high-pitched tone that seemed to exist somewhere between hearing and pressure. The witness described it later as a thin, ringing frequency, almost like the distant whine of electronics. But the strange thing was that the sound did not seem to come from anywhere in the room. It felt like it was inside their head. The tone rose slowly in intensity, not loud, just sharp enough to make the silence of the bedroom feel wrong. The witness opened their eyes. The room looked normal. Moonlight reflected softly from the snow outside. The furniture stood exactly where it should. Then their eyes moved toward the bedroom door, and that was when they saw it. Clinging to the wall beside the doorframe was a tall, irregular patch of darkness. At first it resembled the shapes described in earlier encounters. But this one was different. Instead of a rounded void, the darkness stretched vertically along the wall, like a long tear running upward from the floor. The edges were unstable. They twisted and folded in slow motion, as if the darkness itself were flowing through the surface of the wall. The witness stared at it, trying to understand what they were seeing. The faint, ringing tone in their head grew sharper. Then the darkness began to move. Not drifting, not sliding like a shadow. It shifted upward along the wall, expanding slightly as it moved. The motion was subtle but deliberate. The witness slowly sat upright in bed. The shape did not disappear. Instead, the darkness stretched wider across the wall beside the door. A creeping expansion that seemed almost intentional. The witness felt a sudden wave of fear. Every instinct told them they needed to leave the room. Slowly, carefully, they moved toward the edge of the bed. The moment their feet touched the floor, the shape reacted. The rippling darkness widened rapidly along the wall. The jagged edges spread outward toward the doorframe. Within seconds, the void now occupied the space beside the door, as if it had repositioned itself there, blocking the only exit. The ringing tone inside the witness's head grew stronger. The air in the room felt heavy, almost distorted. The witness later said something about the space around them began to feel wrong. The room felt deeper. The shadows seemed thicker. The silence felt unnatural. And then something even stranger began to happen. Inside the shifting darkness, shapes began to appear. Not clearly, not like normal images, more like brief flashes inside the void itself. For a fraction of a second, the witness thought they saw something move inside the blackness, a twisted outline, then another. fragments of shapes forming and collapsing back into darkness, faces appearing for an instant, then vanishing, scenes that did not belong to the room. The witness later struggled to explain what they had seen, but they described the experience as if the darkness had forced images into their mind. Terrifying things they could not fully describe afterward. The void rippled violently beside the door. The jagged edges pulsed outward once more. The ringing tone inside the witness's head became unbearable. A crushing pressure built behind their eyes. The witness covered their face and shut their eyes tightly. Seconds passed. Then the pressure suddenly disappeared. The ringing stopped. The room fell silent again. When the witness slowly looked up, the wall beside the door was empty. The darkness had vanished. The bedroom looked exactly as it had before. But the encounter did not end that night. In the days that followed, the witness began experiencing severe headaches similar to those described in the earlier reports. Sleep became difficult, and the nightmares started almost immediately. But the most disturbing detail came weeks later, when the witness attempted to describe what had happened. They said something about the encounter had changed them, not physically, but mentally. Because during the moment when the darkness had spread across the doorway, they believed the shape had shown them things they could not fully remember, fragments of images that surfaced only in dreams, terrifying things they wished they had never seen. And even now, long after the encounter, the witness says there are moments when standing near that same bedroom door, when the room suddenly feels quiet again, too quiet, and the shadows along the wall begin to look just a little bit deeper than they should, as if the darkness itself might still be there, waiting, watching. And in Nome, Alaska, no one has ever been able to explain what those witnesses may have encountered. But the reports remain. Different homes, different nights, the same impossible darkness appearing inside bedrooms, always late at night, always watching, and always leaving something behind. Pain, nightmares, or the lingering sense that the darkness may not be gone at all. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you enjoyed our report, join us again every Wednesday night for American Nightmare Radio. Until next time, stay safe.